The fire took my neighbor that night, but I don't think she ever really left the building. I've lived in this apartment building for about 2 years. It's an old place, mostly occupied by seniors who have been here for decades. My roommate and I had settled in comfortably and never thought much about the building's age or its history. That changed last summer. It was around 4 in the morning when the fire alarms tore us both out of a deep sleep. My first thought was that someone had left something on the stove again. It had happened before. I grabbed my phone and my keys, put my shoes on, and we stepped out into the hallway. The hallway was completely empty. No neighbors, no movement, no smell of smoke, just the alarm screaming through the building and the flickering of the emergency lights overhead. We made our way down to the lobby and out the front door. That's when we realized this wasn't a false alarm. A handful of residents were already outside, running and shouting. We followed them around to the side of the building, and then we finally saw it. The top floor was on fire. One apartment was completely engulfed. The flames were pushing out through the windows and climbing the exterior wall. Someone nearby said the woman that lived in that apartment had mobility issues. She couldn't get out on her own. People were frantic, looking for anything they could use to help, and somewhere in the chaos I heard someone ask where the fire department was. We moved back to the front of the building, away from the flames. On the way there, I watched a man jump from his second-floor balcony. He rolled when he hit the ground and sat in the grass for a long time afterwards, not moving much. He was lucky it was only the second floor. The fire department arrived faster than I'd ever seen them respond before. Within minutes, firefighters were raising ladders to the upper windows and helping elderly residents down in their nightgowns. The street was blocked off. The entire population of the building sat on the curb in pajamas and blankets, watching their homes burn. By the time they got the fire under control, the sun was coming up. We sat on a bus the transit service had provided to keep people warm, and that's where I heard it. A man who had been standing outside watching the fire from the beginning leaned over and said that the woman on the 4th floor hadn't made it out. We suspected as much, but then he told us the rest. The firefighters found her in the hallway. She had made it out of her apartment, but couldn't get past the smoke. She didn't make it to the stairs. And then he said something that I haven't been able to shake since. He said that while people were standing outside watching the flames, they could hear her. Through the smoke and the noise and the chaos on the street below, they could hear her screaming. The man who lived directly below her apartment couldn't stop talking about it that morning. He had heard everything. Every word. He looked like a person who had aged 10 years overnight, and I remember thinking that whatever he heard through that ceiling was going to stay with him for the rest of his life. We were allowed back into our apartments that same day. Our unit was the opposite end of the building and was mostly unaffected by the fire, but the building didn't feel the same after that. The walls on the ground floor were black with ash, even though the fire never left the 4th floor. When restoration crews started working on the damaged wing, they found asbestos in the walls. I remember the first night back. I sat in my room and listened to the building settle and creak the way old buildings do. Every sound felt different now. Every groan of the pipes, every shift in the floorboards above me. I keep thinking about her there on the 4th floor, about what her final moments must have been like, about the fact that she had made it out of her apartment and she was so close, but she still didn't make it. I listen to a lot of ghost stories. I always have. And I know that sudden, violent, unfinished deaths are exactly the kind that leave someone or something behind. The kind that linger. Some nights I still hear sounds from the floor above me that I can't explain. Slow, uneven footsteps that stop and start, the way that someone might move if walking was difficult for them. I've never investigated. I don't think I want to. The damaged wing is still closed. The orange tarps are still on the exterior wall, and security guards sit in the lobby every night. I still hear those footsteps sometimes, and every time I do, I think about what that man said on the bus that morning, that people standing outside could hear her screaming through the smoke and the chaos below. I don't think I'll ever forget that. We bought the house knowing someone had died there. What we didn't know was what they left behind. husband and I bought a house on Delmar Road in the spring. It was a good deal, a little isolated, sitting on the end of a long gravel driveway about a mile outside of town. Single story, 3 bedrooms, surrounded by open fields on 3 sides and a tree line at the back. The previous owner was an elderly woman named Margaret. The realtor mentioned it almost as an aside during the walkthrough. Margaret had lived alone in that house for over 30 years after her husband passed. She died in the master bedroom sometime in the winter, and because she had no family nearby, nobody found her for almost 3 weeks. We bought the house anyway. The price was right, and the house was structurally sound. We told ourselves that the history didn't matter. We moved in on a Saturday in late April. The first thing I noticed was how much Margaret had left behind. The realtor told us that the house would be cleared before closing, but it hadn't been. Not fully. There were items in almost every room. A rocking chair in the living room, old cooking equipment in the kitchen, clothing still hanging in the bedroom closet. We boxed most of it up and moved it to the garage, planning to donate it. We didn't think much of it at the time. 3 days after we moved in, I found the first note. It was tucked behind one of the kitchen drawers, the kind of place you'd only find if you were looking carefully or happened to pull the drawer all the way out. It was written in a small, careful hand on plain white paper, just a few lines. It said, "If you are reading this, I'm already gone. Please do not change the bedroom. It is the only thing I have left of him." I assumed it was about her husband. I showed it to my husband, and we agreed to leave the master bedroom mostly as it was for the time being, out of respect. It seemed like the right thing to do. We settled into the house, and I started to feel comfortable there. Then I found the second note. This one was behind a loose baseboard in the hallway. Same handwriting and same careful lettering. It said, "He comes back sometimes. Not often, but I always know when he's been here, because the bedroom door is open in the morning when I left it closed the night before." I stood in the hallway for a long time after reading that note. I told myself that she was an old woman who'd been alone for decades, and grief does things to people. It makes them see what they want to see. I folded the note, and I put it in the same box as the first one and went back to unpacking. But that night, I made sure the bedroom door was closed before I went to sleep. It was open in the morning. My husband said that he must have opened it in the night without thinking. He did that sometimes at our old place. He always got up for water and moved around the house on autopilot. I accepted that because I wanted to. We found 4 more notes over the following months, all in the same handwriting, all hidden in places you'd only find if you were taking the house apart carefully. Behind a wall panel in the bathroom, underneath the bottom shelf of a linen closet, and inside a hollowed-out base of a bedside lamp. Each one was a variation on the same theme. He visits, he doesn't speak. He stands in the doorway of the bedroom and watches her sleep as she pretends not to know he's there, because she's afraid of what will happen if she acknowledges him. The last note was the shortest. We found it 6 months after moving in, tucked inside the back cover of a Bible in the bedroom closet. It said, "I have stopped closing the door." I don't know what Margaret believed was visiting her in that house. I don't know if it was grief or loneliness or something else entirely. I don't know if any of it was real. What I do know is that we started paying attention to the bedroom door. We close it every night now, both of us, deliberately. We check it before we go to bed, and most mornings, it's exactly as we left it, but not every morning. We haven't talked about moving. We haven't talked about the notes much at all. They sit in a box in the garage with the rest of Margaret's things. What we have started doing, without ever discussing it, is leaving the bedroom door open at night. Neither of us has talked about making that change. Neither of us has explained why. But somewhere in the last 6 months, we both just quietly stopped closing it. I think about Margaret a lot these days. I think I'm starting to understand her. We thought we were just surveying an old building. We had no idea what we were about to find inside it. This story isn't about a ghost or a creepy stranger. I was never in any danger during what I'm about to tell you, but it is a disturbing memory that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I grew up in a small city. Downtown was only a couple blocks long, and in the middle of it stood one of the biggest buildings in the area, the local movie theater. I remember going there when I was about 7 years old to watch the first Pokemon movie. Back then, that theater was everything to me. So when I heard a few years later that it was going out of business, I was genuinely sad about it. The building was sold to a religious group that used it for their services. Every time I walked past the old theater, I would see their announcements where the old movie posters used to be. If they were in session, you could hear them singing from across the street. That group owned the building for nearly a decade, until the local government bought it back to restore it as a historic landmark. At the time, I was studying construction with the intent to pursue architecture or civil engineering. My class was lucky enough to be involved in the restoration project. 2 of our teachers were architects working on it directly. The day we visited the old theater, our whole class was buzzing. We were all around the same age, so we all shared the same childhood memories of that place. We ran through the corridors, we sat in the old seats, and we stomped on the wooden floors with our feet, just like we did as kids before the movies started. Once the nostalgia wore off, we got to work and began surveying the building. We were determined to check every room, every corner, no matter how far or how dark. The first discovery was below the stage. There was a small door in one of the corners, easy to miss, probably intended for maintenance staff only. Behind it was a long, narrow room filled with old rusty boilers, part of a heating system that had been out of use for years. It was a strange and slightly unsettling space. All the old tanks and pipes were crowding the narrow walkway. But what we found past the boilers was what first started to unsettle us. There was a small room at the back, a very small room, but it stood in complete contrast to everything around it. The walls were painted a light color, white, I think, and they were covered in drawings. Rainbows, a smiling sun, trees and flowers, happy little figures with dot eyes and wide smiles. It was a children's playroom. We all gathered around the doorway, confused. We understood the idea of having a space for young children during services, but the placement made no sense. The stage directly above was one of the loudest spots in the entire building during services. There was no way this was meant to be a comfortable or quiet place for children. We left the boiler room and moved on. We were puzzled, but not thinking too much into it yet. We made our way through the rest of the building, the bathrooms, the ticket booth, the mezzanine with its water-damaged seats, until finally we reached the projection room on the 3rd floor. Getting there meant climbing a narrow spiral staircase with no resting point. It had over 10 meters of metal steps. Every single one of us was exhausted by the time we reached the top. The projection room was worth it. The old projector was still there, too large to have been removed, I guess, and there were pieces of old equipment scattered around. It was a fascinating piece of history, and we spent a good amount of time exploring it. Nobody bothered to check the last room until we were almost ready to leave. And there it was again, another children's playroom. This one had a train painted on the wall instead of a rainbow, and there was something painted in big cheerful letters about faith. I don't remember exactly what it said. The colors were just as bright and deliberate as the room below, with the same kind of cheerful drawings. This was a space designed for children. My heart dropped. I stood there and thought about where we were. The 3rd floor, the very top of the building, and we had to climb 3 exhausting flights of narrow spiral staircase to get here, the furthest point from every other person in the building, and a room painted with colorful drawings, designed to make a child feel safe and at ease. My classmates and I looked at each other, but nobody said a word. We didn't need to. We all understood what we were looking at. We never visited the theater again, even though we continued working on the restoration project for several more months, and we never talked about those 2 rooms. Some things you find, you just have to carry with you.